Americans for Prosperity North Dakota proudly supported important policy improvements that broke barriers for all North Dakotans this legislative session. From tackling unnecessary and burdensome occupational licensing standards to fighting for tax relief, AFP is proud to have played a part in improving the lives of North Dakotans this year. Join AFP today by visiting www.afpnd.org. This advertisement was paid for by Americans for Prosperity. Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Later in the show, we're going to be talking. There was a murder recently in Fargo, and there is a man in custody for that murder, and it was an arson as well. He allegedly burned an apartment. There's going to be obviously a criminal proceeding regarding that, but related to that, I'm going to talk with a friend of the victim who says that we need some changes to North Dakota's domestic violence laws. Well, you'll hear how that pertains to the case later on. Stay tuned for that. But before we get there, I want to talk for a moment about something that former Vice President Joe Biden said during a recent Democratic debate. It didn't get a lot of attention because I think it's really, in a lot of ways, it's just become kind of a rote position for Democrats. But essentially, Biden said that there was going to be no place for fossil fuels in a Biden administration. I'm not going to, you don't have to trust my characterization of it. I actually have the audio from the debate, courtesy of CNN via Twitter. This is Dana Bash asking the vice president about it, and then you'll hear the vice president's response.
Clarify, would there be any place for fossil fuels, including coal and fracking, in a Biden administration?
No, we would work it out. We would make sure it's eliminated and no more subsidies for either one of those, any fossil fuel.
I'll read that back to you. Dana Bash asks, Vice President, just to clarify, would there be any place for fossil fuels, including coal and fracking, in a Biden administration? Biden's response, no. We would work it out. We would make sure it's eliminated and no more subsidies for either one of those, any fossil fuel. Pretty unambiguous response. Now, first, let me address the subsidies question. This is always something that enemies of fossil fuel development like to trot out, where they say, well, coal and oil are subsidized, and we want to eliminate those subsidies. What they're talking about, coal and oil are not, for the most part, subsidized in the same way that, say, wind energy is subsidized. Wind energy gets a tax credit. It's basically a check from the government based on how much wind power they produce. It's basically the government literally just paying them to produce wind power. That doesn't happen with coal. It doesn't happen with oil. Mostly what we're talking about are tax deductions, where the coal industry is allowed to take, deductions and eliminate their tax burden, or diminish, I should say, their tax burden. It's not the same thing as wind energy. There's a difference between a credit, where the government is essentially just writing a check to an industry to get them to produce something. Ethanol gets this, wind energy gets this. The oil industry gets, tax deductions, which is not unlike, say, if you take a deduction, like if you deduct your mortgage payments, like the interest on your mortgage, that's a deductible thing. It's a deduction that a lot of people take. So that's the distinction between the two situations. I'm not sure it's what you would describe as a subsidy in the sense. And by the way, I've even heard some people describe, our military as a subsidy for the oil industry, right? Because our military, when we were getting a lot of oil from overseas, now that's changed with domestic production. But in the past, I've heard people sort of rhetorically in political debates refer to the U.S. military as a subsidy for the oil industry, because the U.S. military is protecting, American oil tankers bringing oil from the Middle East to the United States, which is ridiculous. Our Navy should protect all American commerce on the high seas. It's one of the reasons why we have a Navy. They don't just do it for the oil industry. They do it for just about anybody. But that subsidies things becomes a loaded term, because when politicians deploy it against the fossil fuel industry, they're usually talking about things that aren't really subsidies. It's just a pejorative they're throwing out. But to his larger point that we're going to eliminate fossil fuels, well, it's crazy talk. We are still extremely reliant on fossil fuels, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't be open to new ways of doing things, but It's just that we have a lot of coal, and coal works. Increasingly, we're getting better at using coal all the time. I think there's an effort out there to make coal seem like it's this antiquated energy source, and it is what it is, but yet we've improved over the decades and decades that we've been using coal to produce electricity in the United States. We've addressed a lot of those problems over time with acid rain, with mercury, with everything else. We have gotten better at those things, and we can continue to get better at using coal. We have hundreds and hundreds of years worth of supply of coal here in North Dakota and across the United States. We have lots of coal. Why wouldn't we find good ways to use this energy source? Why talk so glibly about eliminating it when we could continue to improve its use and get better at it and have it continue to be a stable source of cheap electrical production, which, by the way, our economy runs on that sort of power. But even above and beyond that, let's just talk politically for a moment. There has been a concerted effort among Democrats talking about how they need to start appealing to red state voters, right? Rural voters, red state voters. Democrats, not just in the 2016 election, when obviously the rural part of America was a big base of support for President Donald Trump and helped him get the Electoral College votes he needed to win the election. But during the Obama years, the Democratic Party in red states has been decimated. They lost all sorts of governor seats during the Obama era. They lost all sorts of seats. I think they lost 20%. The Democrat hold on seats in state legislatures across the country declined 20% under President Obama. I believe their governorships declined 35%. It's been kind of remarkable. And so there has been a big push to have Democrats better appeal to red state voters. In fact, don't take my word for it. Here's former North Dakota Senator Heidi Heitkamp speaking recently in the context of her One America project. She said, I quote, "Unless we do a better job of engaging rural Americans," and by we, she means Democrats, "Republicans will have a massive head start in every race for a Senate majority and a lock on enough seats to stand in the way of a Democratic president's agenda. If nothing changes, Democrats will never have more than a hope and a prayer of eking out a slim Senate majority at best." Now, it's a little bit funny that Heidi Heitkamp has suddenly become the rural state vote whisperer. She's won exactly one election, narrowly, kind of a fluky election in 2012, by a margin of less than 1% of the vote. Her last election victory before rural red state North Dakota voters before 2012 was 1996. So I don't know how much of an expert Heidi Heitkamp is on what Democrats need to do to win over red state voters, but she's not wrong in that Democrats have a hard time appealing to red state rural voters. And, well, part of that might be wrapped up in what Joe Biden just said. Now, Joe Biden is the front runner right now in the 2020 field of Democratic candidates for the presidency. And he's also widely seen as a moderate, right? That's supposed to be his big selling point, is he's a centrist. He's a moderate. He's should be more appealing in a general election, on a general election ballot, than maybe some of his more left-wing, competitors like, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, people like that. But if this is a moderate, if Joe Biden is being a moderate, saying that we're going to eliminate fossil fuels, as a practical matter, what does that mean for North Dakotans? The oil and gas industry in North Dakota contributes about half of all tax revenues collected by the state of North Dakota. About 9 to 10% of all employed North Dakotans work directly for the oil and gas industry. Tens of thousands more beyond those people owe their jobs to the industry indirectly because they work for businesses that are dependent on the commerce that the oil industry creates around it. Earlier this year, it was reported by the Bismarck Tribune that the oil and gas industry had a $32.6 billion impact on the state's economy. Just to put that into perspective, pre-oil boom, North Dakota, 2006, the entire state's gross domestic product was $26.4 billion. And that's just oil. I haven't even talked about the thousands of jobs in coal. Now, coal obviously has a somewhat lesser impact on the state's economy, at least directly, than oil does. But also remember that North Dakota produces a lot of electricity that keeps energy prices. North Dakota coal keeps energy prices in North Dakota low. It keeps energy prices in surrounding states low because a lot of our energy gets sold out of state. And those low prices also have an impact on the economy. If you're bringing in a manufacturing job or really any type of business, you got to pay the electrical bill. And, certain types of industry, certain types of manufacturing are obviously very power intensive. And so those lower bills driven by North Dakota coal stimulate our economy that way. I don't have a number for you, but let's just say that the impact is profound. Now, one of the reasons why President Obama became so unpopular in North Dakota, you should actually look back. President Obama got almost, more than 40% of the vote in North Dakota when he was first on the ballot in 2008. And I think that's because President Obama was very effective in a lot of ways at espousing a moderate message. You compare that with Hillary Clinton in 2016, she got, I think it was something like 24% of the vote. So Barack Obama in 2008 performed better than Democratic presidential candidates do historically in North Dakota. But the Obama years were terrible for Democrats in North Dakota because the problem is although he sort of campaigned as a moderate, he came into office and he started implementing regulations that were terrible for North Dakota industry, not just the energy industry, but the agriculture industry too. Remember regulations like Waters of the U.S. rule, right? When coming in and encroaching. I mean, the Obama years were not a good time for production agriculture. And so that's the problem that Democrats have is they don't like our fossil fuel industry. And when they're in power, they're not even especially nice to our agriculture industry. And so they're put in a position, national candidates like Joe Biden, or I should say that local candidates are put in a position by national candidates like Joe Biden of having to defend a Democratic Party that in a lot of ways doesn't seem to like what we do for a living in North Dakota. Now, not all of us in North Dakota work in the energy industry, and not all of us even work in the agriculture industry. North Dakota's got a lot of different jobs, but those are our big drivers. Those industries are the foundation stones of our state economy. If we stopped using fossil fuels, North Dakota's economy would be devastated. And yet here we have the Democratic frontrunner, a supposed moderate, glibly standing on a debate stage and glibly, without equivocation, answering a question about fossil fuels, saying we're going to eliminate them. You wonder why Democrats in North Dakota, local candidates here in North Dakota, have a hard time earning the trust of North Dakota voters. If that's their moderate position, if that's the moderate frontrunner candidate on the national scale, why on earth would North Dakotans want to put Democrats in power in North Dakota? Well, they wouldn't. Until the National Democratic Party changes, until the National Democratic Party becomes something more than a party that represents urban coastal areas, then Democrats just aren't going to win a lot of elections in North Dakota. And it may not really matter how bad Republicans are, because all they have to be is better than a political party that hates the things that North Dakotans do. My interview straight ahead. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. My guest now is the friend of a woman by the name of Denise Marie Anderson. She was murdered recently. There is a suspect in custody, a gentleman by the name of Sheldon George Davis, 44 years old. He is currently denying. He is facing charges related to murder and arson. The crime against her, essentially she was murdered and then her apartment was set on fire. Those facts are in the media. Mr. Davis is going to get his day in court. He is currently denying the charges, and we'll see how that unfolds. Police are currently investigating in the criminal justice system is attending to that situation. However, my guest is Jodi Beauchene, and as I said, she was a friend of Denise Marie Anderson, and she says that there is a problem with the North Dakota Century Code, specifically a chapter pertaining to domestic violence, which she says the murder case that is currently being worked on illustrates a need for reform for this area of the law. Jodi, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
First of all, my condolences on losing your friend. It's a terrible, terrible situation. But from that, you have you are now pushing for some changes to state law. Tell us what needs to change.
What needs to change is the wording in the North Dakota Century Code on domestic violence. It's under Section 14-07.1. In my petition, I've asked people to pay attention to number 4 because that's the wording that needs to be changed.
I actually have it in front of me. I can read Section 4. And what you're referring to, it's a chapter of the North Dakota Century Code that's definitions. Now, if people who aren't familiar with reading statutes, a lot of times what'll happen is the statutes will say, you can do this, you can't do that. And in the statute, it obviously uses words, but then those words or terms need to be defined so that if we say domestic violence, for instance, what exactly do we need? What exactly are we referring to? What does that, what does that entail? Now, when you say Section 4, the overall section of law that you're talking about is a list of definitions. Section 4 is a definition of family or household member, which, and I'm reading now directly from the law, I quote, means a spouse, family member, former spouse, parent, child, persons related by blood or marriage, persons who are in a dating relationship, persons who are presently residing together or who have resided together in the past, persons who have a child in common, regardless of whether they are or have been married or have lived together at any time, and for the purpose of the issuance of a domestic violence protection order, any other person with a sufficient relationship to the abusing person as determined by the court under the section. Now, you're saying there's a problem with that. What is the problem?
The problem is because the relationship was not defined. It was estranged. It is not specifically in that section. That is why the police and the hands were tied. That's why he couldn't be arrested, because estranged was not in that code. And what I'm seeking to do is include all types of relationships, including estranged, including the LGBT community, children who are protected from their parents, live-in partners of their parents, any individual acting as their parent, a girlfriend or boyfriend, an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, including, once again, those estranged relationships. And what I'd also like to see happen is if an offender has 3 or more offenses relating to domestic violence, put him on a domestic violence habitual registry, which is something we don't have in North Dakota, but I would like to see get started.
Now, the situation was that Mr. Anderson in the past had a dating relationship with your friend, Denise Anderson. And it lasted for a period of months. He also has, and I'm reading now, this is from a report in the Fargo Forum by reporters David Olson and Barry Amundsen. They are saying that he has a criminal past that includes convictions for assault, false imprisonment, terrorizing, and domestic violence. Now, why is it that police, I'm assuming that there were problems before we reached the point of Denise Anderson's murder, that there were problems between the two of them before that, and police were saying that they could not arrest him. I mean, why was this a complicating factor in this specific situation?
I honestly don't know. I don't know why her cries for help were unheard. But all I can think of is because it's not specific in that North Dakota code, in that section number 4 where it says estranged. I believe if it included the word estranged relationship, she would be alive today. He would be behind bars. And it wouldn't have gone this far as to where now he's looking at murder and arson on top of that.
It says that, it does say that any person in a past, or for instance, there are, it references people who have resided together in the past, people who have lived together at any time, any other person with a sufficient relationship to the abusing person as determined by the court. I mean, this seems pretty broad already. I mean, it seems like if you came and said, listen, I have an ex-boyfriend, we're no longer in a relationship anymore, but I need a restraining order. I don't see anything in the statute as it's currently written that would prohibit that. But you're saying you feel like it needs to be spelled out more clearly?
I do. I feel the wording in number 4, it needs to be spelled out in black and white, and there are no gray areas. My point being, when we change the wording in the North Dakota Century Code to be very specific, we not only honor her memory, but we are going to save a man or a woman or a child out there that falls in that gray area.
Have you spoken with any lawmakers or anything at this point about these changes?
I most certainly have. I had found out that she had passed away late Thursday afternoon, and I was in shock at first, and then I turned very angry. And it was Saturday night that I sat in my living room and started this petition, and then I started contacting my representatives in District 21. The first one being Senator Kathy Hogan. Then it was Representative Lori Beth Hager and Representative Mary Schneider. And I do want to thank Kathy Hogan for reaching out and getting the ball rolling on legislation. From what I understand, there's been bipartisan support in the state House and the state Senate. It's just going to take, she said, 18 months for this to occur, and then it will appear in the 2021 legislative session.
Yeah. Well, I support. I agree with you that the law could be more clear. Do you know if at any point Denise had sought a protection order prior to her ultimate murder?
Yes, she did. She had 2 pending charges against him, and I do believe that she had sought a domestic violence protection order. Why he wasn't arrested or why that order wasn't issued, I'm not sure. The only thing I can think of is it goes back to section number 4, the definition of a family or a household member.
Have you spoken with anyone in law enforcement about that? Why it wasn't issued or sought an explanation?
No, I haven't. And the reason why I haven't is because Mr. Davis, he is allowed due process of law, so we have to let that process take its place.
Yeah.
No matter how much we want a law to change, that takes time. His due process takes time. And I have to let that, I can't let it sit per se, but I just have to let it ride its course.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I definitely think that this area of the law is one that could use some cleaning up and I think could use some more specific definitions. So any idea when, there'll be some preliminary legislation available that the public can look at and understand what changes are being proposed?
Kathy Hogan was supposed to get back to me sometime within the week or two. They're researching it right now, so I would assume maybe at the beginning of 2020 we would know something, and I'll reach back out to her at the end of this year, beginning of next.
Certainly. And then in the meantime, you have a petition going. How can people follow along with this effort? I know you have a change.org petition, but is there any other way for people who might want to get involved and be aware and maybe make their representatives across the state aware of this push?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody who has shared, who has signed that petition to change our wording in the Century Code. But I urge people to write your representatives in your district, in your state, and on the national level. And second of all, I want to thank Kathy Hogan for standing up and listening to me and getting this ball rolling. To me, if a lawmaker can listen, and you have lawmakers reaching from both sides of the aisle, that is extremely important.
Well, Representative Hogan has that reputation of being a very very responsive lawmaker, so that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Well, that is very good information, Jodi, and good luck with your effort. I think it's a good one. I think it's something that does need to change, and maybe I don't want to say that good could come out of this because it's a horrible situation, but maybe this would be a good change if this could happen and this could protect somebody else. I guess that's a good thing. Jodi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and you have a great day.
that's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. One quick programming announcement. In the month of August, Congressman Kelly Armstrong will be taking a break from doing our weekly segments. He's going to be doing some face-to-face town halls around the state. So we'll be doing that. But for the month of August, when Congress is on break, he'll be busy doing a lot of traveling and a lot of other things around the state. So we won't be doing our regular segments. But September, we should be picking those up again. If you would subscribe to this podcast, that would be immensely helpful. If you're not subscribed already, I know a lot of people listen to these episodes as they're embedded at sayanythingblog.com. But if you subscribe, you can have them downloaded automatically to your smartphone. You can use Spotify. You can use a lot of the different podcasting apps that are out there. If you're not into podcasting, you're obviously listening to a podcast right now, but there is so much great content out there. Download an app, subscribe to this show, subscribe to other shows. You'll really be doing yourself a favor. Also, if you're listening to this on a platform that allows you to rate or review the podcast, if you would leave an honest rating and an honest review, each new one helps those infamous algorithms and helps other people find this show. If you ever have any feedback on the show, email rob@sayanythingblog.com. Follow me on social media. I'm at Rob Port on Twitter. Search for Say Anything Blog on Twitter or Facebook. You'll find them. They're pretty easy to find. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.